And without further ado, let's introduce. We got Jack LaPedis here. He's a real estate attorney. Jack, thank you so much for being here today.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate you. And again, appreciate your constant support, always being at our events and, always being available to help us out in any legal predicament that, this industry tends to get us in. So,
You guys keep me busy.
so why don't we start off? If you can tell us a little bit about yourself and how did you get started in real estate law?
Sure. I've been a lawyer for 29 years, and about 20 years ago, I joined a firm that represents people who are being sued, and they're being represented by their insurance company, and the insurance company hires outside lawyers like myself. And a lot of our cases involved real estate, a lot of real estate agents and brokers, loan officers, escrow companies. And so that is mostly what I did for the about 11 years I was at that firm. And that got me deeply entrenched in the real estate world.
Well, awesome. And was there anything, anything specifically that drew you to a real estate law? Any particular experience or moment that kind of solidified that?
I harken back a little bit to my childhood. I don't know if it's anything consciously that drove me to real estate, but I think it's what kind of kept me in the neighbor dispute stuff that I do, which is when I was growing up, we had nightmare neighbors on one side of us. And I won't go into a lot of the details, but I remember, having nightmare neighbors and at some point, thinking about it, it shouldn't be this way. And when I started taking different kinds of real estate cases, I found out there's this whole area of law where you can handle neighbor disputes, shared trees, shared driveways, shared fences, property line issues, easements, noise complaints. If you know anything about the west side of LA, the fences are merely suggestions of where the property lines might be. And especially in the past few years, where you have a lot of developers and flippers coming in, they love tearing down fences and building new ones. And when they find out that they have an extra 3, 4, or 5 feet on one side because the old fence was put in the wrong place, that can cause a problem. And those kinds of cases are kind of near and dear to me, for not for the developer in those cases, but for the neighbor who, now this developer's coming in and wants to build a fence in the middle of their driveway.
Interesting. So that tends to happen quite a bit.
Yeah, that's a lot of my cases have to do with shared fences, shared trees, arguments over shared driveways, things like that.
Any of your cases involve chainsaws?
Yeah, as you know, I have two cases right now that involve chainsaws.
That's awesome.
Thankfully, chainsaws and fences, not chainsaws and people.
That's a good thing for sure.
Yeah.
So, have you noticed any trends or patterns in the way real estate transactions are evolving, especially with the changes in regulations or like with the changes in the market conditions, for example?
Like I said, I've been in the real estate law space for at least 20 years. And in the last few years, going back to what I was talking about before, there's a lot more, it seems like there's a lot more developers or fix and flippers, people who are coming in, buying property and doing work on the property, not for themselves, but merely as a business transaction.
Hmm.
And you have these developers come in, and I literally signed up a client just this week where they've been in the house for 20 years, and between their property and the neighbor's property, there were these tall trees that provided a lot of privacy for both sides. And the developer bought the property next door and cut down every one of the trees that was exclusively on his property, leaving 3 trees out of like 20, 25 trees. And I say I call them developers or fix and flip. They're not neighbors.
Yeah.
They're people who happen to own the piece of property next to somebody else. And they come in, they bulldoze, they build, and they get out of there. And they just want to make as much money as possible. And many of them build crappy fences to replace fences that were perfectly fine before. They cause problems regarding where the property line is and where they want to build, and really how they treat the people who live next door. They really don't care. And as we come to learn, there's a lot of sort of unwritten rules and niceties that you kind of expect with the person who owns the property next to you, that with these people is just it's out the window. They just don't do that. And so unfortunately, someone like me has to come in and try and defend the legal rights of this completely innocent neighbor who didn't really have in their budget this year pay a lot of money to a lawyer to protect my rights. And it's an unfortunate situation, and that's a trend that unfortunately I don't see changing a lot, because now they're, with the new ADU laws, and they're allowing lot splits for ADUs. That's going to cause a lot of neighborhood issues.
I mean, it's unfortunate and sad. However, that is true, like you mentioned. I mean, a lot of people go about their business in different ways, right? When we take on a project, the first thing that we like to do is go meet the neighbors, introduce ourselves. I give the neighbors my phone number. I let them know, if there's any type of, excessive noise. I mean, obviously they're going to be working on there. We don't want them to be just surprised. So if there's any excessive noise, anything that bothers you, just give us a call right away and we'll get it handled, just to show respect. You're coming in, you just like, I mean, treat it as if you are going to live there, right? You're going to be there for a couple months, sometimes up to 6 months, depending on what type of project it is. I think it's common sense to do that. Recently there was a client of mine, Jessica, which I gave her number, and you suggested she gets a surveyor. She lives, I helped her buy her property like mid of last year. It's in the hillside in Glendale, and there's another property next to it that was a fixer when we bought it, and I was really looking into it, trying to see if I can get it. However, somebody else bought it, remodeling it. She was a little bit concerned, when she was buying her house. She's like, who's going to be moving in here and so forth, which is legitimate. The flipper that came in, they basically came in and just tore up all the trees, just like you said. And in this particular property, it's hard to identify where the property line is because it's hillside and there's no fence, nothing that really identifies this is where the property line starts or ends. And they just came in and tore everything, and it's hillside. So she's also worried about, mudslides and things of that nature. And she went through a hard time. She got me involved. She got you involved as well. You gave her good advice. And now the properties, I believe, is sold. I know it was on the market by this time. I believe it's sold already. But it was a challenge for her to go through. They try to make it right. However, why don't you just come from the beginning before you do anything? Knock on the door, just introduce yourself, and just be respectful. So they just tore everything up, and to her it was dampening the noise because there's a freeway on the other side, and also privacy because the properties are like really close to each other, so they can look into each other. So it's sad, but some people don't have common sense or courtesy.
We had an experience personally at our house where a developer had bought a house that was kitty corner to our property. There was an overlap of about 10 feet of fencing. And one day, a couple of the workers on jumped over the fence onto our
Wow.
property and cut down our hedge.
Are you
It's like
serious?
6 feet. Yeah. I'm like, talk about the dumbest piece of property to trespass on.
Like what?
And we figured it out and everything, but it's just like, in what world does that seem like an okay thing to do, to jump over the fence onto someone else's property and cut down their property? But I mean, that's sort of an extreme example, but even the modest examples are still difficult for the long-term homeowners who happen to be next door.
For sure. And I mean, again, this is a, real estate and investor community platform. So these are, cool things to hear about, to not do yourself or to look out for. I had one of my, clients slash friends, reach out to me a few weeks ago as well. There was a property that went on the market. Their fence was falling down onto my friend's house. So, he called somebody to fix it, and he told them no, the people that worked on the other side, they dug it up so much that it's just, they put so much junk and dirt and they dug it up that it's falling on you. And, he was like trying to see who the owners are. There was nobody there. So it was a little bit hard. So he just went upon himself and just got it fixed. But it's like, it's unfortunate. Be respectful. So, some people will complain about you and others will just, suck it up. But I think just be courteous, be professional, conduct your business in a good way. It's a reflection of how you do business. And if you're thinking about, there's people in this area, in these areas that I do deals with, like they're known. Like if somebody knows this is the investor that remodeled this property, all the agents in the area will just stay away from it because they built a bad reputation and they know the type of work and quality that goes behind their work that, they just advise their clients against it. So you don't want to be that
Right.
person.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you tell us, maybe, is there like a particular memorable case that you've worked on that stands out? Maybe something that was like a great learning experience for you or for your client?
After 29 years, I have a number of cases, but let me try and think of one off the top of my head. So I had a case where it was a developer came in, bought the property next door, and come to find out that the fence is 2 or 3 feet over on the property line, and that the developer wanted to move the fence closer to my client's house. The problem was that was the side where their driveway was, and their house was abutted the driveway. And so if you move the fence 2 or 3 feet, you can't drive a car through it. And so we actually ended up suing them, filing a temporary restraining order, getting a preliminary injunction, and everything was going well. And we decided to go to a mediation to try and resolve the case in some way. And no matter how many times I told the client was very nervous and very nervous about the mediation. I said, just let me talk. I will do the talking. And when the mediator leaves the room, you and I can talk. So we come in, and the mediator comes in and says, well, here's what he wants to do. And my client goes, well, that doesn't sound so bad. Maybe we can do something like that. And I'm just like, okay, now we've given away the farm a little bit. Let's see how much I can get back. That was a situation where I think, my client was trying to be a good neighbor
Mm,
and was trying to be flexible, and I think gave away too much because they didn't listen to their lawyer, because we were in the driver's seat. We had the TRO in place, we had the preliminary injunction, and that one kind of haunts me a little bit because I'm just the lawyer. I'm the
mhm.
advisor. I tell them what's, their legal rights. I explain the options, but I don't make the decisions. It's the client who makes the decision. The client is the boss. And and sometimes, they don't listen to my best advice, and that's a case that haunts me a little bit. I mean, they ended up with most of their driveway, but I think we could have come out a lot better if the client hadn't kind of chickened out, to be honest.
Oh, so is that case done and over with? I know
Oh yeah,
you've
that's from
you
years
talked to.
ago. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. So on the topic of mediation, for those that are not aware of like what is mediation and arbitration and the processes that it goes through, can you just, touch on that a little bit?
Sure. Even though mediation and arbitration sound the same, they're very, very different.
Mm-hmm.
The best way to describe an arbitration is it's a private trial. So the parties agree to hire either one or three arbitrators. Most of my cases will have one arbitrator
Okay.
because they can get expensive if you hire three of them. And you prepare your case, and in a lot of cases you get to do written discovery, you get to do depositions, things like that. And then you go and you present your case in front of the arbitrator, like the arbitrator was a judge.
Okay.
And the arbitrator then makes a ruling like a judge would, and it's typically a binding arbitration, and you can take that ruling and go to court and have it entered as a judgment. So you present witnesses, you present evidence, and the arbitrator makes the decision, makes an order, and you're bound by it.
Mm.
A mediation is a completely different animal. And the best way to think of a mediation is a settlement meeting. And in a
Okay.
mediation, there's your side, and you're typically, when we used to do them in person, you were literally in a separate conference room than the other side and their lawyer. Now we mostly do them on Zoom, and you're in a separate Zoom room. So you could have a mediation and you literally never see the other side that whole day.
Mm.
And you have a mediator who is just a third party, a neutral. Typically, mediators are retired judges or experienced attorneys, and they literally will go back and forth between you and the other side, talking about the case, talking about the facts, the evidence, the damages, what may happen if you go to trial, and the mediator tries to help the parties come together to reach a settlement. But the mediator can't order anyone to do anything, doesn't make a decision, and is not allowed to tell anyone what happened at the mediation. In fact, none of the parties are allowed to say anything that happened at the mediation. It's confidential. And that's a way to encourage people to exchange information, be honest, and really try and, for the most part, lay your cards on the table so that you can get to a settlement. So I've had people, not my clients, but other people who were very confused. They thought the mediator was going to tell them who won at the end when
Mm.
that was not the process at all.
So you amongst, after the back and forth, you guys either agree to finalize it on specific terms or not, right?
Correct. Yeah, some mediations are not successful. And then in some mediations, what you have is the mediator, if he doesn't think he can get any, he or she thinks they can't get any further that day, will do something called a mediator's proposal. And what that is the mediator says, here's how I think the case should settle. And he sends it to each side.
Okay.
And the mediator will say, okay, you have 48 hours to get back to me with a yes or no.
Mm.
And if both sides say yes, then we have a settlement. If either side says no, then we don't have a settlement. In theory, like if you say no, you won't know if the other side said no or yes. Like the mediator won't tell you, oh, well, if you
Oh,
had said
wow.
yes, we would have had a settlement.
Oh, wow.
So you
Okay.
don't find out, you saying no, you don't get to find out what the other side said. But a mediator's proposal, I've had a number of cases resolved at a mediator's proposal as well.
And is there such a thing as like multiple mediation sessions, or is it just that one opportunity that you have and then they do a proposal?
Oh no, you can do unlimited, and not every mediator does mediator's proposals. So
Mm.
I mean, there's a lot of flexibility when it comes to mediations. I had a case uh, where we went to 5 all-day mediation sessions. It was a large case. It involved about 35 parties, and there were about that many lawyers, and so that's not unusual. I've also had mediations that started at 10 in the morning, and we signed the settlement agreement at 2 in the morning the next day. We were there the whole day and night. This is when we were there in person. So we were in the conference rooms, and we ordered in dinner and stayed until it was done. And then you have other cases where you actually schedule 2 or 3 days of mediation because there's so many people involved. When I did large construction defect cases that involved hundreds of houses in construction projects down in Orange County, you knew it was going to take days because the mediator had to talk to everybody and think about all the people that go into building large residential complexes. There's a lot of parties that the mediator has to get through. So,
The
and then
time that I did
there's
it,
half-day mediations where you scheduled for 3 or 4 hours, and at the end of those 3 or 4 hours, you're done.
uh, yeah, the time that I had a mediation, I was involved in, the food was pretty good there, but it was an all day thing. So
Well, now almost all the mediations are on Zoom, so
virtual, right? Yeah.
it's
This
on
was
me to get
before
me good
COVID.
food.
So, would I be off to think that less or a inexpensive way to go about resolving an issue, like going through the mediation route?
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm a big believer in mediation. Definitely, I mean, if you can get into a mediation early, you can save a ton of money.
Mm,
And the CAR purchase and sale agreement has mandatory mediation, which I think is good and important. And it also allows you to sign off on arbitration, so you know ahead of time that you're
mhm.
going to go to arbitration, which I also believe in. I don't suspect that arbitrations save you money, but I like them a lot better, and I think they're more efficient, even if they end up costing more money, which doesn't make a lot of sense, but from a lawyer's standpoint, it does make sense.
Interesting. Okay. So, what are like common legal mistakes you see that investors make when purchasing properties, and how can they avoid them?
Well, I don't want to sound like a broken record because I keep coming back to some of this stuff, but I think we're now at the point where uh, if you're serious about buying a piece of property, you need to get a survey of all
Mm,
four sides of the property. You need to get a survey that indicates where the fences are, where the trees are, where the driveway is, so that before escrow closes, you already know what's going on. Because I think a lot of the investors, developers, flippers, whatever we're going to call them, they get into a property, then they do a survey, and then they realize they paid for more property than they have access to because the fence is 3 feet over onto their property. And they're like, well, then I want what I paid for. Because it's not obvious, you know, who looks at a fence and says, well, you know, that's not on the property line unless it's a zigzag of some kind, which I've seen as well. So I think it's important that you spend a little extra money and get the survey. It's important that you pay attention to what the title report says. And anything that's out of the ordinary, you got to figure out, okay, what is it about this that doesn't look right? Because you don't want to get into a property and then find out there's a title issue. And then, you know, something that's come up, I have two cases where there was fraud and forgery, where the documents
mm,
were not signed by the people who they purport to be signed by. So I have a client, it's a LLC with a number of members who bought a property from an organization who bought a property from not the right owner, not the owner. It was complete fraud. And so you want to try and make sure you have a little personal contact with who you're buying it from, and you know, look into who it is. And you know, I realize that if you've been doing real estate long enough, you've done tens, if not hundreds, of transactions. Everything I see is when something gets screwed up. So 100% of the things I see are messed up. And so I have this view on real estate that there's a lot of things that can go wrong. But these are the things that I see that I look at that happen the most often: property lines, forgery and fraud, and you know, there's also the financial aspects that I don't get into that you know more about, you know, as far as making sure that the numbers work, and so that you're not in the middle of a project and you realize you don't have enough money. And where I come in on that is I have seen people who buy homes and they want to do a remodel. They realize they don't have enough money, and so they go and they say, "Oh, well, they failed to disclose something, so I'm going to sue the seller so I can get more money so I can try and finish my remodel."
interesting. So, yeah, I want to talk about a couple of like scenarios of fraud that I kind of, experienced firsthand. I was involved in some way, somehow. But before I do that, regarding like, the surveys, I get your point, highly recommend to do a survey, find out your lot line, your boundaries, and all that. Just from an investor's perspective and the real estate agent's perspective, these transactions tend to go very quickly, or at least like the contingency or the due diligence period tend to go very quickly in a competitive market, especially out here, like in the LA area. And, every time I do call a surveyor, when we do need a surveyor, these guys are busy. So I don't know. That's kind of the predicament that we get. And I get it. I think a person should do the survey regardless. sometimes it's going to be taking a risk and finding something out. However, at least to prevent to encroach on your neighbor's property at the very least, right?
Yeah, I mean, I use surveyors in my cases a lot. I mean, I have a lot of people who call me, and the first thing I tell them is you need to get a survey
Hmm.
before we even talk any further, because everyone's assuming that the property line is somewhere. And I'm like, it doesn't matter
Hmm.
what we assume. What matters is what the surveyor says
Where it is, yeah.
and what the survey says. So, and I understand there is a shortage on surveyors, but as an investor, what you need to do is you need to find two or three surveyors who are, on your team. I have one surveyor in particular who, if I call him up, I said, I need a survey and I need it fast. He's going to drop something and get out there and do the survey for me because we have that relationship. I refer a lot of my potential clients to him. And so he knows, it's helpful for me when I need him. I try not to, but I know if I need to, he's there. And if you can build a relationship with a couple surveyors where you're like, every time I need a survey, you're my guy or my girl or gal or whatever,
Yeah.
then they will move their schedule around, from some random person who they were going to do a survey for. They, oh, Alex needs a survey. I do 5 surveys every month for Alex when he's a good guy, so I'm gonna move my schedule around. So if you can get to that situation with a couple surveyors, then that problem goes away. And I know it's an added expense, but it's a little like insurance. If you need that survey 1 out of 25 times, that one time is going to save you a lot of time
Hmm.
and money. Having that survey ahead of time is going to save you a lot of time and money. And this saying I've come up with is you don't hire a lawyer that's to tell you everything that's going to go right. And what I'm telling you is in a lot of these cases, if everyone has a survey ahead of time, there wouldn't be a problem.
Just don't tell the surveyor that you needed to deal with a conflict issue or something. They want to be completely out of it. But no, I get you. And it is a relationship business. This is the business we're in. It's a relationship based business. And I was speaking to Brandon White on here. We were talking yesterday, and that's exactly what we were talking about is like, a referral business. He's out in the East Coast. We're very well aligned in the same way. We do businesses strictly based on relationship because when you do have such relationships with vendors and other key players in the industry, they'll get you out of predicaments or tough situations that you might get into, and it's gonna happen. It's gonna definitely happen. So I wanted to touch on, a couple of fraudulent situations that, I've experienced in the last maybe 6 months. So this one that I want to just share with you, and it sucks. Some people just have the audacity to do certain things, but that's why people like you have a good job and you're well needed. So this thing came up yesterday that, I found out about it. So I helped one of my clients and really, really good friends. We've I met him randomly at one of my open houses, helped him buy a property I was selling, and since then we've done multiple transactions. Then we became business partners, and we started flipping homes together. And then, him, his wife, and his kids are like really close with us now. We're like really, really good friends. So they had a property, in the Burbank area, and I helped them get it leased. It's a rental property, and it was a pretty hefty lease, like $15,000. And we got a couple of applications, not too much traffic on it. And this one person came and submitted an application. He has a big family, and my client needed to get it leased, right? I just can get him the facts, get him the background check, get him the credit report, and all that. Let the client make that decision. So they made a decision. They gave him the lease, and the agreement was to pay 1 month rent, 2 months of deposit, and they were going to do like a deferred deposit. So they paid the 1 month rent, 1 month deposit. They were going to pay the second portion of the deposit like 30 days after they move in. And sure enough, they never paid that. They lived there for maybe 9 months, almost a year. And they made the best excuses. It's not like he ignored him or anything. He made some amazing stories that my buddy just believed him, which is sad. And at the end, he was trying to go through the process of getting him evicted. And as you know, in California, it's a little bit challenging. You have to really know the right people. I connected him with a good eviction attorney, and they went through the process. When it got point to there was some serious issues going on with this family. Like at the end, child services was getting involved, but then when it got to a point where the sheriffs were going to come in, they just bailed out and they left. So, ironically, I get an email on Sunday, this past Sunday, from somebody felt like an attorney. And I'm like, oh, come on. I don't want to deal with this right now. I got an email. It has a subject line of the property address. When I saw that subject line, I was like, come on. I hope this is not, that previous tenant trying to like come up with something to play games. And then I get a text message. It's like, is this Alex? I was like, yeah. He's like, yeah, I sent you an email. I was like, well, it's Sunday. I'll get to my email on Monday and I'll get back to you. And then it started kind of going through my mind. I was getting paranoid and I was like, you know what? Why is an attorney going to email me on Sunday? So let me just read it and just get it over with because I want to be able to sleep and then
Yeah,
not
you're
have
not
to
going to
be
get an email
thinking.
from me on Sunday.
So I read it and, unfortunately, to find out, I mean, fortunately, in a sense that it wasn't, anything dramatic that I had to deal with, or like something that I was thinking of. But, unfortunately, this guy was reaching out to me. He's like, I noticed you helped, this this tenant, you rented them the previous address, blah blah blah. It sounds like, they're a professional squatter. This is what they're doing with me, this and that. Anything you can do to help me, I would really appreciate it. So apparently these guys rented his house, which is like a $4 million house in Studio City for $20,000. And I guess they're very popular on social media. I guess he's an influencer, and he got picked up by a TV show, like a reality TV show. So they wanted to film there. So he enticed the owner, like, we'll pay you top dollars, whatever it is. So they gave him 20,000. They were supposed to, they gave him the deposit and first month rent. And then sure enough, he was telling me the story. He's like, they never paid me anything after that. And he told me the word. I was desperate, so I gave it to them. And it's like, situations like this happen. People take advantage of desperate, owners, in this case, landlords. And the sequence of events that he shared with me are very similar to what my client shared with me. They started making up stories that there's like, bed bugs and stuff like that. I was like, perfect. They let you know that, right? Go ahead and, address it. I'll get a company to check it out, blah, blah, blah. Supposedly that they got a company to come over there. My client called the same company and they called them bluff. They're like, oh no, we never came to this house before. So it's so funny in that sense. So yeah, I connected them with my friends, and now they're working together to try to get these people out. So they went to the police station. The police said, these guys, that the law is in their favor. They're not going to go to jail or anything like that unless there's something fraudulent. So we got the bank statements. I shared them with my with the previous landlord, and then he went to the bank and he got bank statements, and he found out that the statements that they provided, they changed the name on them. And they provided bank statements that showed like six figures funds in the account and so forth. So basically now they're going through the case as it's a fraudulent case, and supposedly that they'll get put in jail for a year. But it's like, people get away with a lot of things, so you really have to be careful. And just like you mentioned, check the financials, do proper background and so forth. The other situation that I ran
Well, let me
into,
let me
yeah.
interrupt you for a second because it
Mhm.
just so the people on the call know, I don't handle landlord tenant issues.
Correct. Yeah, I know
Um,
that for a fact.
so, but it's really easy for me to say sitting in my seat where I am. The best advice I can give someone who owns real estate that's in that position is don't be desperate. Don't act desperate. Don't make decisions from desperation. Almost never is going to work out if you are rushing something, if you are cutting corners. You as a landlord, if you're going to rent out your property, you need to set your standards, and I would say set them high. especially in this day and age, set your standards and stick to them and don't make exceptions. And I'm going to tell you from my position, when I opened my own office, I decided there were certain kinds of cases I was going to take, and there were certain things that I was going to, certain standards I was going to have for myself and for my clients. And one of those is a big one that I get laughed at whenever I bring it up at my attorney networking group is I don't represent the bad guy. If there's a neighbor dispute, I don't represent the one who's making the other neighbor miserable. So I broke that rule once a couple years ago. I look back on it and it turned into, it was a disaster. I represented the person for less than a month. Thankfully, they fired me because if they weren't going to fire me, I was going to fire them. And I think what I did when I was listening to him talk and realizing he was kind of the bad guy, I thought I could save him from this situation. And so I didn't follow my own rules and regulations for clients. And thankfully, it only cost me a little bit of time and money. He didn't end up suing me for malpractice, which is what I figured would happen. I put on my calendar 1 year after he fired me. Once that 1 year passed, I was like, I could breathe now because I was convinced he couldn't sue me. But if you're a property owner and you are desperate, it's okay to be desperate, but don't act desperate and don't make decisions based on desperation because you end up in that situation.
Yeah, and the common thread between these two landlords was desperation.
Yeah. So
Exactly.
someone put a question in the chat. I
Yeah.
would want to maybe
Yeah,
take
I'm gonna go
that
to
before
that
we go
as
to the
well.
next story.
So David mentioned, first of all, yes, please ask questions, drop them in the chat. David has a question. In your chain of title fraud and property line examples, won't title insurance cover it?
Generally speaking, yes, but there's situations where, for example, if you're the investor and you buy the piece of property and the fence is 3 feet over on your property, you own what you bought. And unless you move the fence, you won't have access to that area. Where the title insurance comes in is whether you're the one suing or you're the one being sued. That's one thing. And then the other thing is whether you want to get title insurance involved in the dispute or if you are able to resolve it yourself. A lot of these developers have a lawyer on retainer who takes care of these sort of things, and so they don't get title insurance involved. The chain of title fraud, if you are the victim of that fraud, yeah, absolutely, you can get title insurance involved. One of the cases I handled for the longest time, almost 6 years, my client was a victim of title fraud, and the insurance company dragged their feet about getting involved. And when we were finally able to get them involved, since my clients were the plaintiffs, they weren't going to come in and represent my clients, but we were able to make a claim to get their money involved to resolve the case. Unfortunately, it's not cut and dry that if you have one of these issues come up, the title's going to step in. And I actually have 2 cases right now where I'm co-counsel because title is assisting on certain aspects of the case, but not on other aspects. And that's what I'm handling for the client. And so there, you sort of have a blended representation. And it's nice having title insurance come in in that situation because they'll pay for experts and they'll pay for depositions, which is really nice. That means the client doesn't have to pay for that.
Or would they have other ways to like resolve it in a less expensive way if they choose to? Like,
I mean, almost all these problems go away with enough money.
enough money.
So, but insurance companies don't just throw their money at things. I mean, I have a case right now where I have a co-counsel who's hired by title insurance, and that attorney and myself and the clients all believe that we can now sit down and have a mediation and resolve the case. But the insurance company wants some depositions, to paper their file to justify up the chain how much money we think it's going to take to resolve the matter. So in that case, to kind of the title insurance company, who in the end is going to pay money, is kind of slowing things down.
So we're coming to the end of the webinar. We do still have like 9 minutes left, so this is the perfect time to ask questions. David brings up another question. We did cover this, David, but Jack, I'll leave it up to you if you want to kind of go through it again. Just touch on it. He'd like to know the difference between mediation and arbitration.
The short answer is mediation is a settlement meeting, and arbitration is like a private trial.
Yeah, David, thanks for the questions. Keep them coming. If you have any questions, just, drop them in there. I did want to, in the meantime, share about, like I mentioned, there was another fraud situation and talking about title. So I get a call from, or one of my agents actually gets a call from someone, that wants to sell a piece of land. And it's a pretty nice piece of land. It's in Hollywood on Sunset Boulevard, perfect, residential, commercial, mixed use. It's about like $3.5 million. So, she gets me involved and I'm talking to the guy and, he wants us to sell it. I'm like, wow, this is pretty easy. Like, I ask him like, do you know who we are? Have you looked us up? Have you done your due diligence on us? He's like, no, I just want you to sell it. I mean, it seems, do you like, why are you making it so difficult? I'm like, well, I just want to know that you know who you're working with and I want to know who I'm working with. I'm not going to just take the deal. So, we kind of went through and, he calmed down a little bit and we came to a conclusion. We did numbers. We had a couple different conversations and I evaluated the property and we made our suggestions and we agreed that we'll list his property. And I like to do a little bit of checking who's on title, whose property it is, and stuff like that. And it was a trust. So I did a little bit of research on the trust, and he's calling from like Missouri. So I did a little research on the trust. There's out of state property, and there's a property in Porter Ranch out of that same trust. And, I was like, you know what? Okay, great. We got the paperwork drafted, the listing agreement. However, I told them, before we proceed to anywhere to going on the market or going live on the MLS, we need a copy of your trust so we can just provide it to our title and escrow company in the meantime. He kind of hesitated a little bit. Then he's like, I just got it, updated with my attorney, but I'll get it to you. I was like, perfect. So I just held on everything. Wasn't going to proceed. And then, a week or so later, he sent it to us, and he's still like emphasized he wants to move quickly, and the pricing wasn't an issue. He just wants to move quickly. I was like, great. I had a gut feeling there, and sometimes I get that where I was like, you know what? I don't usually do this. This one, I kind of smelled something fishy, so I sent it to my title rep. I was like, hey, this is the situation. I feel something weird about it. Yes, do I want a $3.5 million deal? Absolutely. Do I want to sell it? Absolutely. But I don't want to run into be in a pickle and have to deal with drama later. Let me just try to do as much as I can up front. So I sent it to him and they called me back. They're like, we checked the trust. We called the attorney. The attorney's out of Texas. He doesn't even know who this person is. So it turned out to be this guy is like completely fraudulent. So I had to, and again, I can't accuse him of anything. So I just had to, get on the phone with him and just let him know that, hey, I'm not the right fit for you. You're probably better off just going somewhere else. That's what they advised me to do. Like I couldn't like tell him, hey, this is what you're doing because there's no like tangible proof. But with that said, like there's a lot of it out there, and apparently, especially with like title fraud on vacant land, because people have vacant land, they just
Oh yeah.
walk away from it and
It goes back to the
crazy.
desperation. It's like, yeah, it sounded like it was too good to be true, because it
It did.
it was.
Mhm.
And you did all the right things, but not every agent, not every investor is going to think these all through. Someone calls you out of the blue with wants to drop a bunch of money in your lap. You got to be suspicious, and you did all the right things. And I have this rant that I do about notaries. Like, notaries get paid, I think it's $15 a signature now. Is that something like, it's
I
something
think I
like
pay
that?
like 35,
Yeah, okay.
35.
Whatever it is.
Not a mobile notary. They charge escrow charges like 200, 250.
Yeah, I mean, you have mobile notaries. You could go to the UPS store and get notarized and stuff, and they are the most important person. They are the gatekeeper of real estate transactions. They get paid 15, 35, $100 on million dollar, multi-million dollar transactions.
Yeah.
And they are the most important person in the transaction. And their record keeping is supposed to be significant. But I can tell you, I've handled notary fraud cases. It's very easy to get around. And I think we need to turn the notary laws on their head. I think that mobile notarization should require a court order. I think that notaries should have to have an office with a dedicated room to do notarizations that have cameras, and that all notarizations need to be videoed, and copies of driver's licenses, and all of those notarizations should be uploaded to some governmental agency where they hold on to them. And so if you get a deed, you can say, okay, here's the deed, here's the notary, and this is the transaction number. I want to see the video of this transaction, this deed being signed.
Yeah.
And it would almost completely eliminate notary fraud. I mean, I had a case where a guy said, "Oh yeah, I was going from one job to another, and I put my notary book and my stamp on the roof of my car, and I drove away, and I lost it, and it was gone for a month, and then one day it just showed up on my doorstep." And the guy lent it to someone, and they did. I mean, it's just ridiculous. I mean, the notaries I have deposed are
How convenient.
they're not, they're not professionals. And there's stuff you have to go through, and there are some notaries. I have friends who are notaries who I would trust with everything, but there's just so much notary fraud, and it's so easy, and it's literally the gatekeeper. They are our last defense. Like, without a notary on board, you can't commit this kind of fraud, and it just needs to change. It never will. I mean, it's my fever dream, but I've handled the notary fraud so much, and it's shocking to me, the people that we trust with the most important job in a real estate transaction.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, they get paid so little, and it's crazy, and they do a very important thing. We have one last question. Don has a question for you. I don't know if you're going to be able to answer it. As you were saying, the changes that you want to implement or you would like to see implement, I was like, Jack for president, right? So with that said, Don
I'm
has a question.
overqualified for the job, apparently.
He said, "Will Doge tackle property deeds next?"
Yeah. Okay. So
We'll pass.
we'll pass on that one. I try very hard not to mix politics or religion with my business or networking.
Can't agree with you more. Can't agree with more. So, with that said, it's a wrap. Thank you all for being here. If anybody's in the LA area or the Pasadena area, please come by our Pasadena event. It's next Tuesday, March 4th at 6:30 p.m. Otherwise, we'll see you on the next virtual webinar. Thank you so much for being here and have an awesome day.
Thank you, Jack.
Thank you.